I am Captain Cora Carter, 32 years old. Last Sunday, my mother-in-law slid a brown envelope across the dinner table, looked my husband straight in the eye, and said firmly, "I think you need to see this." Inside was a DNA test she had secretly done on our 3-year-old daughter. She predicted the results would destroy my marriage. What she did not expect was that those very results would ruin her life. But here is the thing that none of them know. Not my husband, not his sister, not even his father. I had received the lab report exactly 2 weeks before that, and what I did in those 2 weeks changed everything. Before I take you back to the starting point, take a second to like and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is. Now let me take you back 7 years to the day I first met Patricia Atwood. 7 years ago. 7 years feels like a lifetime when you live it in 6-month deployments and 24-hour shifts. But in Greenwich, Connecticut, time is a preserved specimen. It is frozen in blocks of expensive ice and silent hallways. I was 25 then, a second lieutenant with fresh gold bars that felt heavier than they looked, and a 2004 Ford F-150 that leaked oil like a gut-shot deer. I remember the sound of that gravel, that expensive crushed white stone crunching under my tires as I pulled into the Atwood driveway. It was not just a path, it was a half-mile warning track designed to let the residents know exactly who was coming to disturb their peace. The lawn was laser-cut, a green velvet carpet that had never seen a weed or a stray footprint. Then there was the house. Stone walls that looked like they could withstand a mortar strike. Heavy iron gates. A private fountain that hissed at me as I parked my beat-up truck next to a pristine Mercedes. I stood on the stone steps. My heart was hammering a rhythm against my ribs, a fast, frantic beat that I refused to let reach my face. I reached down my fingers, tracing the stiff fabric of my BDU, my battle dress uniform. I had just finished a double shift at the base and barely had time to swap my field gear for something clean. The fabric felt thick, real, honest. Mark reached over, his hand brushing mine. He was wearing a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my truck's engine. He was smiling that easy, carefree smile that belongs only to people who have never had to check their bank balance before buying groceries. "Do not be so tense, Cora," he said, his voice light and airy. "My mom is easygoing. She will love you." He was wrong. He was so incredibly dangerously wrong. The heavy oak door swung open. No creak, no groan. Just the heavy, silent weight of money moving on well-oiled hinges. Patricia Atwood stood there. She did not smile. She did not offer a hand in welcome. She just existed in the doorway. Her eyes were not the eyes of a mother greeting her son. They were the lenses of a security thermal imager. I felt her gaze sweep over me, calculating my net worth in milliseconds. She looked at my scuffed combat boots, tracking the wear on the leather where I had kicked through sand and gravel. Her eyes moved up to the insignia on my collar. She was not looking at a woman her son loved. She was assessing a breach in the perimeter. She held out her hand. I took it. Her grip was firm, dry, and cold. It felt like grabbing a piece of marble from a winter graveyard. There was no warmth, no welcoming squeeze. It was a boundary marker. A this far and no further handshake. "Cora," she said. "Just my name, no title, no, it is a pleasure." It was a statement of fact, nothing more. The dinner was a tactical ambush disguised as a 3-course meal. The dining room smelled of lemon wax, expensive lilies, and old secrets. We sat at a table that could have seated 20, but the air felt thin like we were trapped in a vacuum. The first course was truffle soup. The scent was earthy and cloying, heavy enough to coat the back of my throat. Patricia did not eat. She watched. She picked up a silver spoon and began to tap it, tink, 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 against the edge of her porcelain bowl. It was the rhythmic sound of a sniper checking his windage. "So Mark tells me you grew up in Bridgeport," she started. She said Bridgeport the way a surgeon describes a malignant tumor. I did not flinch. I did not look down at my plate. I sat up, straight shoulders squared the way the academy had drilled into my marrow. "Yes, ma'am, the South End." "And your family?" My mother was a nurse, worked the third shift at the hospital for 20 years. My father walked out when I was 6. I kept my voice flat. An after-action report, no apologies, no shame. I told her the truth that the army was my only ticket out, my only way to pay for a degree. My only way to make sure I did not end up as another statistic on a police blotter in a neighborhood that forgot how to hope. I finished my statement and set my spoon down. I looked her right in the eyes. I saw the tiny muscle between her eyebrows twitch. To her, my life was not an American success story. It was a contamination. I was a parasite, a lower-class grifter trying to find a way into the Atwood ledger. I could see her filing me away under unacceptable. Patricia pushed her soup bowl away, the silver clattering loudly against the wood. She did not look at Mark. She kept her eyes locked on mine. Then she did it. She raised her right hand and began to slowly rhythmically turn the pearl earring on her right lobe. It was a mindless gesture to anyone else, but in that silence, it felt like the mechanical click of a weapon being taken off safety. That must have been so difficult for you, she said. Her voice was coated in a layer of fake empathy that felt like industrial grease. It was the sound of a predator trying to get you to lower your guard. I knew that tone. I had heard it in interrogation rooms and on the edges of dangerous borders. She was not feeling for me. She was measuring the depth of my desperation. She had decided right then between the soup and the salad that a girl who grew up on food stamps and grit had no business carrying the Atwood name. The sentence was passed before the main course even hit the table. Later that night, on the drive back to the base, I did not speak. Mark was humming along to the radio, completely oblivious, convinced the night had been a triumph. I stared out the window at the dark Connecticut woods. I thought about the desert. I thought about the nights I had spent chewing dry ramen in a foxhole, saving every cent of my hazard pay just to make sure my mother's lights stayed on. I had bled for my country. I had sweat for my rank. Patricia Atwood had never bled for a damn thing in her life, but she was clearly ready to spill mine. I reached into the pocket of my jacket and pulled out a small black notebook. I opened to a fresh page. I did not write about the house or the food. I wrote down her triggers. I noted the way she moved her hands. I documented her obsession with lineage and purity. I did not know then that 7 years later she would try to use my daughter's DNA to destroy my world. But my instincts were already screaming at me. I closed the notebook and clicked my pen. In my head, the alarm went off. Condition red. The perimeter was breached. The war had officially begun. In the military, we talk about buffers, safe zones, no man's lands. 6 months after that first dinner in Greenwich, I thought I had built one. Mark and I got married in a quick courthouse ceremony, mostly because I did not want Patricia Atwood turning my wedding into a tactical display of her checking account. But she still showed up. She wore a cream-colored silk suit that was so close to white it was a declaration of war. She stood in the back, her arms crossed, looking at the judge as if he were sentencing her son to life without parole. I ignored it. I had survived basic training. I could survive a bitter mother-in-law in an off-white suit. We bought a small red brick house in Stamford. It was 40 minutes away from the Atwood mansion. I calculated 40 minutes was enough of a gap to maintain a ceasefire. That house was my pride. I had spent every weekend stripping old wallpaper and scrubbing grease off the kitchen floors until my fingernails bled. I paid half the mortgage with the hazard pay I'd saved from my time overseas. Every brick in that wall represented a night I did not sleep in a tent. But I forgot one thing. In any defense system, the weakest point is always the human element. And my human element was Mark. I came home on a Friday evening around 6 p.m. The air was turning sharp with the coming winter. I pulled my truck into the driveway and reached for my keys, but the front door was already unlocked. My stomach did a slow, heavy roll. I am a trained intelligence officer. I do not forget to lock doors. I pushed inside my hand instinctively flat against the wall, scanning the hallway. The house smelled wrong. It did not smell like the cedar candles I liked. It smelled like industrial-grade bleach and heavy floral perfume. I walked into the kitchen. My spice rack, which I had organized by frequency of use, had been stripped bare. Every jar was now lined up on the counter, sorted by color and size like soldiers at a parade. I moved to the bedroom. My heart was pounding a hard, angry rhythm. I opened the linen closet. My towels, which I usually just folded and stacked, had been pulled out. They were now rolled into tight, obsessive cylinders and arranged by shade. It was a violation. It was as if someone had reached into my brain and decided my thoughts were too messy. There you are, Cora. Patricia was sitting on my sofa. She was holding a cup of tea in one of my mugs, the one with the chipped handle she had mocked. She looked completely at home. She looked like she owned the air I was breathing. I noticed the place was a bit neglected. She said, her voice smooth as oil. I thought I would help you get organized. A woman in your position clearly has not had the time to learn how to keep a proper home. I felt the blood leave my face. My hands were shaking, so I shoved them into my pockets. I did not scream. I did not throw her out. I waited until she left. Then I waited for Mark to get home. When I confronted him, he would not even look at me. He sat at the kitchen table flipping through a sports magazine, his shoulders hunched. She has a key, Mark. You gave her a key. It is for emergencies, Cora, he muttered. She just wanted to help. That is just how she is. Just let it go for the sake of peace, okay? Do not make this a thing. He had opened the gates. He had handed the enemy the map to our sanctuary and told me to be grateful for the invasion. I realized then that my husband did not have a spine. He had a wet noodle where his courage should be. The real blow came in November, Thanksgiving at the Atwood Mansion. The table was a sea of crystal and silver that caught the light like jagged glass. Mark's entire extended family was there, including Aunt Margot, a woman whose face looked like it had been carved out of a sour apple. They were all eating the expensive turkey and drinking the vintage wine that Mark's latest project had paid for. A project, I might add, that I'd spent 3 nights helping him fix because his math was falling apart. I sat at the corner of the table, nursing a glass of plain water. I felt the weight of their judgment. It was a physical pressure like being at the bottom of a deep pool. Patricia stood up at the head of the table. She held her wineglass high, the deep red liquid shimmering. The room went dead silent. Even the sound of the furnace seemed to stop. A toast, Patricia announced. She did not look at me. She looked at the room, her eyes bright with a cruel kind of energy. To Mark, our brilliant Mark, a man who is so kind, so generous that he is willing to settle. A man who, as we all know, could have married anyone. Anyone at all. The silence lasted for a heartbeat. Then Aunt Margot let out a sharp, dry cackle. The rest of the table joined in. It was a soft, polite ripple of laughter that felt like 1,000 tiny needles under my skin. They were not even hiding it anymore. I was the charity case. I was the mistake he was kind enough to make. I looked at Mark. I waited for him to stand up. I waited for him to tell them to shut up. I waited for him to say that his wife was a captain in the United States Army and deserved respect. Mark did not look up. He took a bite of turkey and stared at his plate, his face turning a dull, embarrassed red. He said nothing. He did not even reach for my hand. I took my fork and stabbed a piece of meat on my plate. I did not cry. I do not cry. But in that moment, something inside me died. The hope of having a family, a real family, was gone. I was alone in enemy territory, and my only ally had just deserted his post. I am sitting here looking at the screen, and I have to ask you, have you ever felt that cold, hollow feeling when the person who is supposed to protect you stays silent while you are being shredded? If you have been through this, if you know what it is like to deal with a toxic family that thinks they are better than you, please hit that like button and subscribe. It helps me know I am not telling this story to an empty room. Comment "not alone" below if you have ever had to fight this battle by yourself. Your support means everything to me. I looked at Patricia across the table. She was smiling at me now, a victor's smile. I did not smile back. I just watched her. I started recording everything in my mind, every insult, every smirk. I was no longer a wife trying to fit in. I was an operative behind enemy lines. I was pulling my forces back deep into the fortress of my own mind. I stopped counting on Mark to be my shield. From that second on, I was the only shield I had, and I was going to make sure that the next time Patricia Atwood fired a shot, it would be the last mistake she ever made. Lily arrived 2 years after that Thanksgiving massacre. For a moment, a short, fragile moment, I thought a child might be the bridge that finally crossed the gap between the Atwood mansion and my world. When she was born, her hair was a deep, muddy brown. I remember Patricia Atwood standing in the hospital room, looking down at the plastic bassinet with a look of measured approval. She held the baby for 5 minutes, nodding as if she were inspecting a piece of heavy machinery that had finally met the quality control standards of the Atwood pedigree. I sat in the hospital bed, my body aching, my mind already calculating the hours of sleep I would lose. I thought the ceasefire might actually hold. I was wrong. The ceasefire lasted exactly 6 months. It started as a faint shimmer. A soft strawberry red began creeping in from the roots of Lily's hair. By the time she was 9 months old, her head was a brilliant, fiery crown of red. It was a recessive gene from my mother's side, a ghost from my own lineage that had decided to make an appearance. To any normal grandmother, it would have been a beautiful quirk. To Patricia, it was a declaration of war. The physical distance grew first. Every time Patricia visited our house in Stamford, she stopped reaching for the baby. She would sit on the edge of the sofa, her back as straight as a steel rod, watching Lily crawl across the carpet. She did not see a grandchild playing. She saw a walking piece of evidence. Her eyes would fixate on that red hair narrowing into slits. Her mind obviously running a biological profile that did not include me. Science did not matter to her. Facts were irrelevant. Her paranoia was the only truth she recognized. Then came the first birthday party. The Atwood mansion was decorated in muted creams and golds, a stark contrast to the vibrant red of my daughter's hair. In the middle of the living room, under the glare of a crystal chandelier, Patricia walked up to Lily. She did not pick her up. Instead, she used 2 fingers, her thumb and her forefinger, to pinch a single lock of Lily's hair. She held it up toward the light, turning it slowly. It was exactly how a police officer holds a bag of confiscated narcotics at a crime scene. Interesting, Patricia said, her voice carrying across the silent room like a cold wind. Red hair has never been a genetic trait in the Atwood pedigree, not for 3 generations. The air in the room vanished. I felt the heat rise in my neck, but I kept my posture rigid. I stepped forward and took my daughter back, tucking her head against my shoulder. "It is a gene from my side of the family, Mother," I said. My voice was a flat, sharp chisel. Patricia did not argue. She did not have to. She just smirked a tiny, jagged movement of her lips and walked away. That was the first shot of the psychological operations campaign. She did not need to prove anything. She only needed to plant the seed of doubt in the minds of everyone else in the room. The digital siege began 2 days later. Courtney, my sister-in-law, posted a photo of Lily on Instagram. It was a close-up of the red hair. The caption read, "An Irish child lost in the Atwood house. Life is full of surprises, right?" I sat at my kitchen table, the blue light of the phone screen washing over my face, and I counted the comments. 14. 14 little jabs from the extended family. 14 whispers about mailmen and mysteries. I did not cry. I did not call Mark to complain. I knew he would just tell me I was being sensitive. Instead, I opened my laptop. I began downloading every medical record, every genetic chart, and every family history document I could find from my mother's side. I logged every comment and every time Patricia refused to touch the baby. I was an intelligence officer. I was not suffering. I was collecting data. The resentment did not make me weak. It forged me into a machine. The pressure peaked on a Tuesday morning. 400 hours. The alarm on my phone shrieked through the darkness of our bedroom. I reached for it before the second ring. It was a call from the base, a temporary duty order. A TDY meant I had 48 hours to pack and leave the state for a readiness exercise. I sat on the edge of the bed, the cold floor biting at my feet. Mark was in a different time zone, stuck at a construction site 3 states away. My mother was recovering from a hip surgery and could not lift a child. The only person who could take Lily was Patricia. I spent the next hour packing Lily's bag. I folded her clothes into neat, perfect squares. I labeled every bottle of breast milk. I felt a sick, oily dread in my stomach as I drove toward Greenwich. I walked up those stone steps, holding Lily tight. Patricia opened the door. She was wearing a silk robe, her face a mask of polite concern. "Do not worry, Cora," she said, reaching out to take the baby. "We will take very good care of her." I watched her pull Lily into the shadows of the foyer. My daughter reached back for me, her small hand grasping at the air. My gut screamed at me to turn around and take her back. My tactical brain was shouting that the perimeter had been abandoned. I walked back to my truck, my hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. I had to leave for 48 hours. I had to trust the person who hated me most with the person I loved most. As I pulled away, I saw Patricia standing in the window, looking down at the baby in her arms. She was not rocking her. She was staring at Lily's hair with a look of cold, predatory hunger. I did not know then that those 48 hours would be the window she needed to commit a crime that would change the trajectory of our lives forever. I put my foot on the gas and did not look back. I had a mission to complete, but the real war was happening behind me. I pushed through the front door at twilight. My boots felt like lead weights. Dried mud from the training range still clung to the rubber soles, leaving dark, crusted flakes on the entryway rug that looked like scabs. 48 hours. 48 hours of tactical drills, 0 sleep, and the kind of deep muscle ache that makes you want to lie down on the cold hardwood and never get up. But I did not. I stood straight. I always stand straight. Slouching is for victims. The house was too quiet. It had that heavy artificial stillness that comes when someone has been doing something they should not. The fridge hummed in the kitchen, a low rhythmic drone that usually faded into the background. Today it sounded like a warning siren. Patricia was in the living room. She was sitting on the rug surrounded by Lily's wooden blocks. Lily was giggling, reaching for a blue square. Patricia looked up. She flashed a smile. It was a practiced plastic thing. Her facial muscles stretched too far, her eyes remaining as cold as a November morning in the mountains. "Everything went well, Cora. She was an absolute angel," she said. Her voice jumped half an octave, a nervous tell. In an interrogation room, that pitch change is where the lies start to leak. It was the sound of guilt wrapped in silk. I just nodded. I dropped my gear bag by the door with a heavy thud. My only goal was to get a bottle of milk for my daughter. I walked into the kitchen. My eyes did what they always do. They scanned the room. High-value targets first. That was when I saw the gap. The dish rack was full of clean plates, but the far right corner was empty. Lily's blue plastic cup, the one with the soft silicone straw, was missing. I checked the dishwasher. Nothing. I opened the cabinet where we kept the toddler gear. It was not there. My stomach tightened. That cup was not just plastic. It was a reservoir. It was covered in Lily's saliva, her cells, her DNA. I walked back into the living room, my hands shoved into the pockets of my field jacket. I watched Patricia stack a red block on top of a yellow one. Her hands were manicured, perfect, and utterly heartless. "Where is Lily's blue cup, Patricia?" I asked. My voice was level. No anger, just a request for information. She did not look at me. She kept her eyes on the blocks. Her breathing had changed. It was shallower. "Oh, that old thing, I tossed it in the trash at the gas station." Scratched plastic is a breeding ground for bacteria, Cora. I figured you would want her to have something better. I will buy her a new one from a boutique in Greenwich. A smooth lie. A practiced Connecticut country club lie. I had bought that cup at Target exactly 3 weeks ago. It was brand new. It was fine. The blood in my veins turned to slush. She did not throw it away. She had bagged it. I needed more. I took a breath, letting the smell of her lavender perfume hit me. It was thick and cloying. I made an excuse about needing a wet wipe. I stepped toward the armchair where her designer leather handbag sat. The zipper was half open. I know how to search a perimeter without leaving a trace. I hooked a finger inside the lining. My heart skipped a beat. Tucked into the side pocket was the edge of a heavy-duty Ziploc bag. It was the kind we use in the field for evidence collection. Next to it sat a thick brown shipping envelope. It had a pre-printed label, a P.O. box address, a return label for Geneva Lab. She had done it. She had waited for me to leave for 48 hours so she could steal my child's biological identity. She was not a grandmother. She was a scavenger. My first instinct was to grab that bag and shove it in her face. I wanted to scream until the windows rattled. But my training took over. In G2, you do not fire until the target is in the kill zone. If I confronted her now, she would play the victim. She would cry to Mark. She would say she was just curious about the family tree. Mark would believe her. He always believed her over me. I had no legal proof. Not yet. I pulled my hand back and smoothed my jacket. I walked over to Lily and picked her up. She smelled like baby shampoo and home. I looked at Patricia. I let a small empty smile touch my lips. Thank you for watching her, Patricia. I appreciate the help, I said. Every word felt like I was swallowing broken glass. Of course, dear. Family looks out for family. She stood up, smoothing her expensive slacks. She grabbed her purse, the stolen DNA rattling inside, and walked toward the door. I stood on the porch and watched her taillights fade into the darkness. The night air was cold, biting through my thin shirt. I did not move until the street was empty. I went inside and locked the door. I did not just turn the deadbolt, I engaged the security chain. I walked to the kitchen and looked at the empty spot on the dish rack. She thought she was the one holding the cards. She was wrong. I was not a victim. I was a captain in the United States Army, and she had just handed me the ammunition I needed to bury her empire. I sat down at the kitchen table and opened my black notebook. I did not write about how I felt. I wrote the time, the date, and the lab address I had memorized from the brown envelope. I looked at the phone on the counter. It was silent. My brain was stuck on a loop, condition red. I waited for the inevitable call. 3 weeks of silence. Silence is a special kind of hell when you're waiting for a bomb to go off. I spent those 21 days moving like a ghost through my own life. I cooked dinner. I folded laundry. I kissed Mark. But I was not there. I was a hollow shell, eyes constantly darting toward my phone every time the screen flickered. The tension was a physical weight. A thick cord wrapped around my throat, tightening every time Patricia called to check in on Lily with that saccharine, grease-coated voice. She was waiting. And so was I. The break came on a Thursday afternoon. 2:14 p.m. My phone vibrated against the laminate kitchen counter, a harsh, jagged sound that made me drop the dish towel I was holding. A New York area code. I did not recognize the number, but I knew exactly who it was. I took a breath, letting the air settle in my lungs, and answered. My voice was flat, professional. This is Cora Carter, I said. Mrs. Carter. My name is David. I am calling from Geneva Lab. The man's voice was clinical, distant, filtered through the static of a New York office. We are processing a DNA kit for a minor, Lily Carter. The sample was submitted by a Patricia Atwood, who listed herself as the family representative. However, our system flagged this for a verbal authorization under federal law. Specifically regarding biometric privacy, we require direct consent from a legal parent or guardian to release the finalized report. Patricia had arrogance, but she did not have foresight. She had calculated the theft, but she had not calculated the security protocols of a high-end lab. I sat down on a kitchen stool, my hand gripping the edge of the counter until my knuckles turned white. My heart did not race. It slowed down. My tactical brain took the wheel. I am her mother, I said. My voice was a scalpel, cold, sharp, and precise. I did not authorize this test. I do not give consent. Lock the sample immediately. I am demanding that you revoke all access for Patricia Atwood. She is not a representative. She has no legal standing. The man on the other end paused. I could hear the tap, tap, tap of keys. Understood, Mrs. Carter. Access for the submitting party has been frozen. The file is now restricted. I hung up and immediately dialed another number. Rachel. She was an old friend from the service, a former JAG officer who had seen enough military divorces and family betrayals to fill a stadium. She answered on the second ring. I could hear the sharp hiss of her e-cigarette through the line. Cora, she said, her voice like sandpaper on glass. You sound like you just found a tripwire. Patricia did it, Rachel. She stole Lily's DNA. The lab just called. That is a felony, Cora. Biological material theft. Illegal medical testing on a minor without parental consent. You want me to call the cops? We could have her in handcuffs by dinner time. I looked out the window. A gray squirrel was digging in the frozen dirt of the backyard. Not yet, I whispered. If I call the police now, Patricia will play the victim. She will cry to Mark. She will tell him she just wanted to protect the family legacy. And Mark will take her side. He will tell me I am overreacting. He will tell me she is just an old woman who made a mistake. No, I need more than a police report. I need to dismantle her. Rachel exhaled a long whistling sound. You are thinking like an operative again. You want to lure her into the kill zone. I want her to think she is winning, I said. I want her to wait for that result until the suspense eats her alive. I want her to build her entire attack on a foundation of air. All right, Rachel said. But you need the data. You need to know what she was looking for. I called Geneva Lab back 5 minutes later. This time, I did not use my civilian voice. I used the voice I used at the base. I gave them my military ID number. I proved my guardianship with the cold efficiency of a drill sergeant. I gave them a new email address, a secure encrypted home that Mark did not even know existed. Send the report to me, I ordered. Total blackout for the Atwood address. If anyone calls asking for the status, you tell them the file is in extended processing. Do you understand? Yes, ma'am, the technician replied. The trap was set. Patricia would keep checking her inbox. She would keep staring at her mailbox, waiting for the proof she thought would destroy me. She had no idea I'd already pulled the pin on the grenade she was holding. That night, the house was silent. Dark. The kind of dark that feels like it has weight. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Beside me, Mark was snoring. It was a wet, rhythmic sound, the sound of a man who had no idea his world was about to catch fire. He was sleeping the sleep of the innocent or the sleep of the willfully blind. I did not know which was worse. I felt a wave of loneliness so cold it made my teeth ache. This was the curse of the soldier. I was the only one awake. I was the only one standing guard. I was protecting a family that did not even know they were under attack from a woman who shared their last name. I was carrying the weight of a secret that could level this entire house, and I was doing it alone. Patricia wanted to use my daughter's blood to kick me out of the Atwood life. She wanted to prove I did not belong. But as I lay there in the dark, watching the blue light of the digital clock flicker from 200 to 201, I realized something. She was right. I did not belong in her world of fake pearls and stolen DNA. I did not want an apology anymore. I did not want a seat at her table. I wanted to see the look on her face when her empire of lies turned to ash. I wanted her to realize that you do not mess with a mother who knows how to fight a war. I closed my eyes, but I did not sleep. I waited for the morning. I waited for the report. I waited for the truth to finally arrive. The lab report was not going to be enough. I knew how Patricia Atwood operated now. If I showed up with just a DNA test, she would lie her way out of it. She would say the lab made a mistake or that I had tampered with the sample. To kill a queen, you do not just take her crown. You burn the ground she stands on. I sat in my home office at 3 a.m., the blue light from my laptop screen washing over my face like a ghost. The house was dead quiet. Mark was in the bedroom, dead to the world, probably dreaming of blueprints and drywall. He had no clue his wife was currently conducting a digital raid on his mother's soul. I needed to see the whole tree. Patricia had a big mouth when she was feeling superior. A few months ago, she bragged about her ancestry account. She called it her digital pedigree, a way to prove the Atwood bloodline was as pure as a New England winter. She thought she was being sophisticated. I saw it for what it was, a massive security hole. I opened the site and typed in her email address. Then came the password. I did not even have to think. I typed in Lily's birthday. Access granted. It is the oldest mistake in the book. Arrogance makes people sloppy. Patricia hated my daughter, but she was obsessed with her birth as a milestone in her own legacy. She used Lily's life as a key to her own secrets. I started clicking through her matches. Most were distant cousins, rich white people in Virginia or Massachusetts. But then I saw it, a red exclamation mark blinking at the top of the list. A new match, a high probability hit that had appeared only a week ago. The name was James M., age 36. Location, Portland, Oregon. I leaned in, my eyes stinging from the glare. The relationship estimate hit me like a physical blow. 25% match, immediate family. Below that, the specific breakdown, predicted half-brother to Mark Atwood. I picked up my mug of black coffee. It was cold and bitter, a dark sludge that matched the feeling in my gut. I did the math. 36 years ago. Patricia would have been 25. This was 2 years before she ever met Warren Atwood. 2 years before she became the Queen of Greenwich. She had a son. A secret son she had buried in Portland and wiped from her record like a stain on a white rug. She had dumped her own flesh and blood to marry into the Atwood millions, then spent the next 3 decades playing the part of a holy virgin. I clicked on James M.'s linked family members. There was one other connection, one person who had helped him find his way back to this digital trail. Margaret R., Aunt Margot. The hypocrisy was thick enough to choke on. That sour-faced woman had sat across from me at Thanksgiving, laughing while Patricia shredded my dignity. She knew. She had helped Patricia hide the baby. She had watched her sister discard a human being to secure a bank account, and then she had the nerve to look down at me, 'cause I grew up in Bridgeport. They were not a family. They were a crime syndicate disguised in pearls. But there was one more piece to the puzzle. One thing that explained why Patricia had turned into a predator the second my daughter's hair started to change. I clicked on James M. Zuri's public profile. He had uploaded one photo. It was a grainy shot of a man standing in front of a coffee shop in Portland. He had a kind face. He had Mark's chin, and he had a thick, unmistakable mane of strawberry red hair. The truth hit me so hard I felt sick. Patricia Atwood was the carrier. She was the reason Lily had red hair. She did not suspect me of cheating. She never did. She knew exactly where that red hair came from the moment she saw it. Every time she looked at my daughter, she was not seeing a stranger's child. She was seeing the ghost of the son she had abandoned 36 years ago. Lily was a living, breathing reminder of her greatest sin. To keep her secret, she decided she had to destroy us. She tried to frame me for infidelity to cover up the fact that her pure bloodline was built on a lie. The malice of it was breathtaking. She was willing to ruin my marriage and take my child's father away just to protect her own vanity. It was not just petty, it was evil. It was the kind of rot that goes all the way to the bone. I am sitting here in the dark, and I am realized that some people will burn down your entire world just to keep their own lies from smoking. It makes me wonder how many of you out there have been the scapegoat for someone else's hidden mess. If you can feel the cold fury in my voice right now, hit that like button and subscribe. I need you with me for what comes next. Comment ghost if you have ever dealt with a family secret that was meant to bury you. I am reading every single one. I reached over and hit the print command. The printer in the corner groaned to life, spitting out pages of genetic matches and James M.'s birth records. The paper was warm when I pulled it from the tray. I gilled it together with the lab report from Geneva. I took a heavy gray-brown envelope and slid the documents inside. No labels, no names. I did not feel angry anymore. The heat had died down into a cold, hard diamond of intent. I was no longer the girl from Bridgeport trying to survive. I was the person holding the detonator. Patricia had spent 7 years trying to make me feel small. She had tried to steal my daughter's water bottle to prove a point. Now I had the only point that mattered. I tucked the envelope into my laptop bag and stood up. I looked at the clock. 4:15 a.m. Sunday morning. In 12 hours, we were scheduled for dinner at the mansion. Patricia thought she was preparing a feast to celebrate my downfall. She had no idea she was setting the table for her own execution. I walked into the bedroom and watched Mark sleep. For the first time, I did not feel lonely. I felt ready. Tomorrow, the Atwood name was going to mean something very different. I closed my eyes and counted the seconds. The war was almost over. Sunday, Judgment Day. I did not reach for my dress uniform. I did not need the silver bars or the crisp creases of my blues to feel like a soldier. Instead, I pulled on a plain navy blue sweater and dark slacks. No jewelry, no war paint. I was carrying enough high-explosive truth in my bag to level this entire zip code. I stood in front of the mirror and checked my reflection. My eyes were flat and cold. I looked like a woman headed to a quiet family dinner, not an operative moving into a kill zone. I grabbed the heavy gray-brown envelope from my desk and tucked it deep into my handbag. It felt solid, heavy, real. The drive to Greenwich was 40 minutes of silence, punctuated only by Mark's complaining. He gripped the steering wheel of his SUV, venting about his mother's insistence on these mandatory family gatherings. He had no clue. He was driving us straight into an earthquake, complaining about the traffic, while the tectonic plates under his life were already shifting. I rested my head against the window and watched the gray Connecticut sky. 14 days. 14 days I had sat on this secret. 14 days of watching Patricia Atwood play the part of the doting grandmother on FaceTime, her voice dripping with that fake saccharine warmth. It was time to end the theater. And we pulled into the driveway. The white gravel crunched under the tires, a dry skeletal sound. We walked through the front door, and the air hit me like a physical weight. It was thick, cloying. It smelled of expensive roast lamb and heavy beeswax candles. The Atwood mansion was a museum of old money artifacts, a place where the rot was always covered by a fresh coat of lemon wax. Warren sat at the far end of the long oak table. He looked gray, his shoulders slumped as if the weight of the Atwood name was finally crushing him. Courtney was in her usual spot, her face illuminated by the blue light of her phone, her thumb scrolling with a bored rhythmic flick. Then there was Patricia. She sat at the head of the table, the throne. She had her hair pinned into an aggressive tight bun that looked like it hurt. Around her neck sat the 3 strands of pearls, her signature armor. She looked like a general who had already seen the surrender papers. She waved Mark to the chair on her right, physically separating us. She pushed me toward the far end near Courtney. I sat down. I did not lean back. I did not get comfortable. I crossed my fingers on my lap and waited. I watched her breathe. Her chest moved in short, shallow hitches. Her eyes kept darting to her designer handbag on the empty chair beside her. She was vibrating with a high-frequency excitement. The predator was ready. She thought she had me cornered. The main course was a blur of silver and tension. The only sound in the room was the rhythmic hollow tick of the grandfather clock in the foyer and the sharp, jagged scrape of knives against bone china. The sound was unbearable. It felt like a needle scratching against my teeth. Patricia barely touched her lamb. The grease on her plate began to turn into a cold white film as she waited. She was too busy tasting the blood she thought was coming. When the plates were cleared, the air in the room seemed to vanish. It became a vacuum. Patricia stood up. The legs of her heavy oak chair shrieked against the floor, a sound like a blade on a whetstone. Warren looked up, startled. Courtney finally put her phone down. "Before we bring out the dessert, I have something I need to share," Patricia announced. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the thrill underneath. The hunt was over. She reached into her bag and pulled out a brown envelope. It was thin, flimsy. It was not the heavy-duty evidence bag I'd seen in her purse 3 weeks ago. This was a placeholder. A prop for the lie she was about to tell. She held it up high, a trophy for the whole room to see. "What is this, Trish?" Warren asked, his voice low and tired. Patricia ignored him. She looked straight at me. A cruel, triumphant smile spread across her face. It was the smile of someone who had just won a war they did not even realize they were losing. "This is the truth," she said. "These are the DNA results." For Lily, the room went cold. Mark stopped breathing. His fork fell, hitting his plate with a sharp metallic ring that seemed to echo for an eternity. He looked at his mother, then at the envelope, his face turning a pale, sickly shade of gray. Patricia did not wait for a response. She slowly slid the envelope across the polished oak table, pushing it toward Mark. It moved with a dry, rasping sound, stopping right against his hand. "No offense, honey." Patricia said, her eyes locked on mine. Her voice was like rotting fruit, sweet and disgusting. "But this family deserves the truth. We all know red hair is not an Atwood trait. It never has been. Mark has a right to know if that child is actually his blood." She had done it. The public execution. She had branded me a liar and a cheat in front of her husband and her children. Aunt Margot let out a tiny, sharp cackle from the corner. Warren's mouth hung open in shock. Mark turned to me. His eyes were wide, filled with shock and the beginning of a dark, ugly suspicion. He looked like he was seeing a stranger. "Open it, Mark," Patricia ordered. Her voice was sharp now. The velvet was gone. The iron was out. I did not blink. I did not defend myself. I did not say a word. I just sat there, my hands flat on my thighs, watching her. I leaned back an inch. I let the silence stretch until it was almost loud. I watched the fake pearls around her neck rise and fall with her breath. The trap was open. She had just stepped right into the center of the minefield. I waited for him to tear the paper. I waited for the explosion. Mark's fingers hooked under the flap of the brown envelope Patricia had slid across the table. Rip, bup. The sound was sharp and sudden, like a dry branch snapping in a dead forest. Every person at that oak table froze. Warren stopped breathing. Courtney's phone was forgotten in her lap. Patricia sat perfectly still, her chin tilted up, waiting for the killing blow she thought she had finally delivered. I watched Mark's eyes. They moved fast, scanning the thin sheet of paper he had pulled out. His hand started to shake, just a tiny rhythmic tremor. He looked confused, then angry. I knew exactly what he was looking at. It was a fake. A sloppy amateur printout Patricia had probably whipped up on her home office inkjet to scare me into a confession. She was staring at me, a wolfish grin beginning to pull at the corners of her mouth. She thought she had won. She thought I was about to break. I did not give her a single second of satisfaction. I reached into my handbag, pulled out the heavy gray-brown envelope from Geneva Lab, and dropped it onto the center of the table. Thud. The sound was heavy and final. It sounded like a body hitting the floor. "Do not bother with that trash, Mark," I said. My voice was a flat line, no emotion, no heat. Just the cold facts of an after-action report. Read the real one, the one with the biometric seal and the federal certification. Patricia's eyes went wide. The blood drained out of her face so fast she looked like a wax figure melting under the dining room lights. Her jaw did not just drop, it went slack. She looked at the heavy envelope I had just produced, her breath catching in her throat with a wet, raspy sound. "Open it, Mark," I commanded. It was not a request. It was an order. Mark dropped the fake sheet. His hands were fumbling now, his movements jagged as he tore through the heavy-duty seal of the Geneva Lab report. He pulled out the thick stack of documents. He flipped to the first page, his eyes locked on the bold text at the bottom. 99.9998%, Mark whispered. His voice was cracked, barely audible over the hum of the furnace. "She is mine. Lily is mine." The silence that followed was a vacuum. Patricia lunged across the table, her silk sleeves dragging through a bowl of congealed gravy. "That is a lie. It is a mistake. Give me that paper." Her voice was a shrill, desperate shriek. She reached for the report, her manicured nails clawing at the oak. Mark did not let her touch it. He pulled the folder back, his face turning a dark, dangerous shade of red. He stood up, his chair flying backward and slamming into the sideboard. "Shut up, Mother!" It was the first time in 30 years he had ever raised his voice to her. The sound echoed through the mansion like a gunshot. Patricia froze, her hand halfway to her throat. She started to tremble. Her fingers went to her right ear, obsessively twisting the pearl earring. "A mistake. The hair. It does not make sense," she stammered, her eyes darting around the room, looking for an exit that did not exist. I stood up slowly. I did not need to shout. I let the silence do the work. "It is accurate, Patricia. Every decimal point. Because I am the one who intercepted your illegal little science project 2 weeks ago. I am the one the lab called for authorization, not you." I leaned over the table, my shadow covering her plate of cold, greasy lamb. "What you did is biological material theft. It is a violation of federal privacy laws. In some states, that is a one-way ticket to a federal prison cell. You are lucky I'm an officer and not a vigilante." Patricia's face was white. She looked like she was having a stroke. But I was not done. In a tactical strike, you do not stop until the enemy's command structure is in ruins. "Mark," I said, my eyes locked on Patricia. "Turn to page 4, the extended lineage match." Mark flipped the pages, his breathing heavy and ragged. He stopped at the top of the 4th sheet. I saw the moment the truth hit him. It was a physical blow. He staggered back an inch, his eyes widening until they looked like they might pop out of his skull. "James M." Mark read the name out loud. It felt like a curse. 36 years old, Portland, Oregon, relationship half-brother. The table went dead. Warren, a man who had spent 30 years believing he knew everything about his wife, looked at the paper. Then he looked at Patricia. He did not say a word, but his teeth were grinding so hard I could hear the enamel crackling. "Who is James Trish?" Warren's voice was a low, terrifying growl. Patricia slumped into her chair. Her spine, that steel rod she'd used to look down on me for 7 years, finally snapped. She looked at Margot. Her sister stood up, her face a mask of cowardice, already looking for the door. "Trish, do not," Aunt Margot whispered, but it was too late. Warren slammed his fist onto the table. The crystal glasses jumped and rattled. 36 years. You had a kid and dumped him in Oregon just to secure a wedding ring from an Atwood. You spent 30 years lying to my face. Patricia did not answer him. She turned her head and looked at me, a flicker of that old narcissistic malice still burning in her eyes. "This is your fault. You did this to ruin me. You planned this." Mark did not give her the floor. He grabbed his phone and threw it onto the table. It slid across the wood and stopped right in front of her. On the screen was a grainy, scanned photo from the mid-'80s. It was a photo of a young woman standing in a park. She was 20 years old. She was smiling. And she had a thick, wild mane of strawberry red hair. "Cora did not do anything motherboard seat," Mark said. His voice was cold, final. "You did this. You dumped your own kid because he reminded you of a life you wanted to bury. And when you saw that same red hair on my daughter, you tried to destroy my wife because you were terrified your own filth would come to light." Mark looked at the photo, then at the broken woman in the pearls. "You have been dyeing your hair for 40 years to hide who you are. Well, we see you now." Patricia reached up and unhooked her right pearl earring. Her hand was shaking so hard she dropped it. It hit the table with a dull clack and rolled into the congealed gravy. She did not pick it up. She just sat there, the Queen of Greenwich, stripped of her crown, and her lies weeping pathetic, cowardly tears as her empire turned to ash. Mark grabbed my hand. His grip was tight. Real. For the first time in 7 years, he was not looking for a middle ground. He was standing on the front line with me. "Let's go, Cora," he said. We walked out of that house, leaving the screaming and the wreckage behind us. The war was over, and for the first time, I could finally breathe. We walked out of that mausoleum before the dessert was even served. The air outside was a razor-sharp, biting, and clean. It cut through the cloying scent of lamb grease and expensive beeswax that had been suffocating me for 7 years. I sucked in a lungful of the freezing Connecticut night. It tasted like oxygen after a fire. The Atwood perimeter had not just been breached, it had been leveled. There was no coming back from a crater that deep. I did not look back at the red brick walls. I did not need to see the debris. I could hear it. The collapse started before we even reached the SUV. Through the tall glass windows of the dining room, I saw the silhouettes of the survivors scattering like rats from a sinking ship. Warren was done. He did not yell. He did not scream. He simply walked upstairs, his footsteps heavy and hollow on the mahogany staircase. 20 minutes later, the sound of heavy leather suitcases hitting the trunk of his car echoed through the driveway. 2 bags. 36 years of marriage packed into 2 bags. He started the engine and drove into the dark without a single glance toward the front door. He could not spend one more night sleeping next to a stranger who had traded her own flesh and blood for a seat at his table. Margot was next. She slipped out the side door, her head low, her designer heels clicking frantically on the gravel. She carried the stench of her own complicity with her. The cousins followed the same people who had snickered at my Bridgeport roots and whispered about my daughter's hair. They did not snicker now. They kept their eyes on the pavement, slipping into their luxury sedans and disappearing into the night. No one stayed to comfort the woman at the head of the table. Patricia was left sitting alone in the glow of the flickering candles, surrounded by half-eaten meat and the cold, hard proof of her own shame. The Queen of Greenwich was now just a lonely woman in a big empty house full of ghosts. I woke up Monday morning to a phone that would not stop vibrating. It hummed against the nightstand like a trapped hornet. Patricia. She had left 12 voicemails by 8 a.m. Her voice was a wet, jagged mess of snot and desperation. The cold, calculated predator was gone, replaced by a beggar. She begged for forgiveness. She blamed the stress. She blamed the wine. She blamed me for forcing her hand. I did not listen to them. I saved every single one of them to a secure cloud drive. In my line of work, we do not call these apologies. We call them evidence. By Friday, the desperation hit a boiling point. I heard the crunch of tires on our driveway. I did not need to look out the window to know it was the Mercedes. I walked to the front door but did not open the screen. I stepped out onto the porch, taking the high ground. Patricia stood at the bottom of the steps. She looked small, shrunken. The pearls were gone, replaced by a frayed wool coat and eyes that were rimmed with red. She started to speak, her hands reaching out like claws, but I cut her off. My voice was a steel shutter. "Do not take another step," I said. The air between us turned into a demilitarized zone. "This is the DMZ, Patricia. You are officially no contact. You do not call. You do not text. You do not show up at my daughter's school or my front door." She started to sob, that loud theatrical wailing she used to manipulate Warren for 3 decades. "She's my only granddaughter, Cora. You cannot be this cruel. You were cruel the second you tried to steal her identity to cover your own tracks," I replied. I leaned over the railing, my shadow falling over her like a heavy blanket. "If you cross this line, I do not call Mark. I call the police. I have the lab reports. I have the recordings of you admitting to the theft. I will have a restraining order on your desk by sunset. Do you understand me?" She looked up at me, and for a second I saw the old malice flicker in her eyes. But she knew. She knew I was not the scared girl from Bridgeport anymore. I was a captain with a paper trail and a clear shot. She turned around her shoulders, hunched, and walked back to her car. She had lost the only territory that ever mattered, the right to be a grandmother. The most important part of the extraction was the ally. On the drive home from Greenwich, the truck was silent, but it was not the heavy, angry silence of the past. Mark reached across the center console and gripped my hand. His palm was cold and his fingers were shaking, but he did not let go. He had finally woken up from the 40-year fever dream his mother had curated for him. He had seen the monster behind the pearls, and there was no one seeing it. "I am sorry," he whispered. The words were small, but they had the weight of a mountain. "I should have stood in front of you. I I should have seen it. I just nodded. I did not need a long emotional speech. I am a soldier. I value the action over the prose. The way he had slammed that photo onto the table, that was the only apology I needed. He had chosen his perimeter. He was finally standing on the right side of the wire. When we got home, the cleansing began. I moved through our red brick house like a search and destroy team. I took down the curtains Patricia had suggested. I threw away the overpriced porcelain bowls she had bought to elevate our kitchen. I changed the digital locks on the front and back doors. Every trace of her influence was bagged and dragged to the curb. The Atwood way was dead. The house felt different, lighter. The shadows in the corners did not feel like they were watching me anymore. I sat at the kitchen table watching the moonlight hit the floorboards. I did not feel like celebrating. I did not feel like dancing. I felt the deep, bone-weary quiet of a mission successfully completed. I had protected my daughter. I had saved my marriage. And I had done it without becoming the monster I was fighting. I looked into the living room. Mark was sitting at the desk, a pen in his hand and a single sheet of paper in front of him. He was not looking at blueprints. He was looking at the Portland address I had given him. He took a breath and pressed the pen to the paper. "Dear James," he wrote, "the dawn was coming. And for the first time in 36 years, the truth was finally going to be the only thing left standing. Saturday night. The air in our red brick house was finally still. It was a heavy, honest kind of quiet that you only get after a long, dirty war. I sat in my small office, the yellow light of the desk lamp cutting a sharp circle across my training schedules for the next month. I held a pen between my fingers, feeling the familiar weight of it, but my eyes kept drifting toward the door. In the living room, the only sound was the steady, rhythmic click of laptop keys. Mark was hunched over the coffee table, his face bathed in the pale blue glow of the screen. He was not looking at blueprints or structural reports tonight. He was writing the first draft of a letter to James M., the brother Patricia had discarded in Portland 36 years ago. I watched him through the doorway. He looked tired, his shoulders tight with the effort of finding the right words. But he did not stop. He was done with the shadows. He was done with the curated lies that had held the Atwood name together like rotten timber. Instead of letting the family legacy burn into a pile of ash, Mark was trying to build something new from the wreckage. He was choosing transparency over prestige. We were reaching out to the man Patricia had tried to erase, building a new kind of alliance that did not require a blood oath or a trust fund. We were reclaiming the definition of family peace by painful peace. I pushed my chair back and looked at the heavy brown envelope still sitting on the corner of my desk. It was empty now, but it still felt like it weighed 50 pounds. Looking back at the last 7 years, the irony was a jagged pill to swallow. I had spent my entire adult life in a uniform. I had been trained to spot an insurgent from 500 yards and to trust my life to a stranger in a foxhole based on nothing but the patch on their shoulder. I had fought in places where the dirt was red and the heat was a physical enemy, and I had always come home. Yet the most brutal, calculated, and filthy fight of my life had not happened in a desert or a jungle. It had happened in a dining room in Greenwich, Connecticut. The people I was supposed to call family were the ones who had planted the mines. The place that was supposed to be my safe harbor was actually the most dangerous zone I had ever entered. It is a strange thing to realize that a complete stranger in a combat zone will die to protect you, while the woman who shares your daughter's DNA will spend years trying to skin you alive just to save her own vanity. Bloodline is a hollow word when it is used as a weapon of control. Genuine loyalty is not something you are born into. It is something you earn in the trenches. Patricia never learned that. She thought her last name was a shield. She did not realize it was actually a target. I have seen a lot of reports in my time, but the data on human nature is the most consistent. The people who shout the loudest about morality and tradition are usually the ones hiding the most filth in their closets. Patricia used my background and my lack of a silver spoon as a distraction. She tried to make me the villain in her story, so no one would look at the man she abandoned in Oregon. But truth is not a flexible thing. You can bury it, you can dye its hair, and you can hide it under a string of expensive pearls, but it will always find its way to the surface. It is the only weapon that never runs out of ammunition. You do not need to scream to win against a manipulator. You do not need to drop to their level or use their dirty tactics. You just need to keep your head cold. You gather the facts. You secure the evidence. You wait for the right moment to pull the pin. Sometimes the very weapon your enemy built to destroy you is the one that gives you total liberation. Patricia thought that DNA test would be my execution. Instead, it was her own. She handed me the detonator, and all I had to do was step back and let the truth do its job. The campaign is officially over. The perimeter is secure. I am Captain Cora Carter, and my line is now unbreakable. If you are listening to this, and you are trapped in a house full of mirrors and lies, if you are being crushed by people who claim to love you while they dig a grave for your reputation, remember this. Your boundaries are your own. You do not owe your life to a toxic legacy. You do not have to accept the poison just because it is served on a silver platter. Stand your ground, trust the data, let the fire burn away the lies until only the steel remains. Thank you for sitting with me in this room. Thank you for listening to the full dossier. If this report gave you the strength to hold your own line, do not forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who needs a little iron in their blood. I will see you in the next operation. For now, the mission is complete.